So I want to welcome everybody to tonight's SALT Talks. We're going to be talking about, as part of our independent living theme for the month, we're talking about your living skills, the life skills, just what we should be targeting, or what should we be learning about and preparing our child for, the preparation for adulthood, just whether it be living on their own or even if they're living with somebody. There's a lot of there's lots of challenges that we have to face. And how do we prepare them for these steps? Because there's a lot of steps along the way. It doesn't happen overnight. So we'll be talking about that tonight. And before we get started, just wanted to let everybody know that we are recording tonight. It will be available to listen to again. I usually get them uploaded by the weekend. We have it on our SALT YouTube channel. And you can, click on that. You can subscribe, and then you are made aware of updates and things like that go on as well. And also tonight, before I forget, this is our last session before we hit the holidays. So we decided this year we wouldn't hold any sessions during November and December just because it is the holidays. So just to make you aware that we won't have any sessions, but we'll be kicking off January with a big topic: money, 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 financial planning 101. And then we'll be going into, from there after January, we'll be talking to a financial planner, stable accounts, special needs trust, that kind of thing in January. And we get into guardianship, and followed by a lot of big topics after that. So you'll be able to see on our SALT Google Drive and the live binder, you'll be able to see our schedule on there and what we have planned. So with that, for those who don't know who I am, my name is Patty Strom. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm the Parent Resource Trainer Coordinator for the SALT Talks. And tonight we have our special guest is Dr. Amie Duncan. And I want to thank her for coming. She had presented back, we decided it was like early spring or about midwinter last year around January on this topic. And I think you did a few modifications you indicated from that then, but we thought this is a great presentation to revisit. Things have changed a little bit since last year. I mean, we were kind of like COVID-ish. And so this year we're kind of starting to work our way out of that, but we want to revisit this topic as it applies so well to our independent living sessions. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Amie, and just to introduce yourself and a little bit about you, and then go ahead and I have you co-host to share your screen.
Great. Okay, let me get this screen shared, and then okay. Patty, on your end, does that still just look like a slide? You can't see my notes? Good.
Yes.
Okay. Good. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm always really like talking about this topic, mostly because this is really what I do day in and day out. So like Patty said, if you've got questions along the way, feel free to put them in the chat box, and she'll let me know, and we can talk about that, or we can also wait until the end. A little snippet about me is I'm a clinical psychologist. So I've been at Cincinnati Children's for the last 13 years, and I primarily work with adolescents and young adults with autism. And I primarily, at this point in my career, do research. And so what I do is I create interventions, and then we test them out and see if they work, primarily with adolescents right now. And one of the ones that really has been something we've been working on for the last 8 to 10 years is this intervention really focusing on daily living skills. And so what I'm talking about today comes from just a lot of different, both clinical and research experiences working with families and autistic teens and young adults in particular, and kind of what we've learned along the way. I'll also talk a little bit about sort of this from, being a parent as well, kind of what this means, just because, you know, a hazard of my job, I feel like my kids have to be really good at daily living skills if I'm ever run into anyone in the community, which Cincinnati is always smaller than you think. But, you know, I think it's a critical skill to develop. And I've learned some things along the way by doing that as well. So we'll be talking really about all of those things. And, you know, feel free to jump in with questions as we get going. Okay, so here's really our objectives today. We're going to talk a lot about daily living skills and how you can assess them. You know, like Patty mentioned, you know, there's different things you can do if it's self-care, if it's, you know, knowing when you need to go to the doctor, that all falls under this very sort of broad category of daily living skills. So it can often be overwhelming to start working on them. So we'll talk about ways to assess them. And then the bulk of what we'll do today is to talk about really, you know, how do you put a plan together for tackling how to work on daily living skills, and what are sort of our evidence-based strategies and supports. And I'm always going to talk about evidence-based things just because we know that these things work. They've been tested out, they're tried and true, you know, but if there's other things that work and people want to chat about those, we can talk about that as well. Okay, so I always start off with this because I think it's not what you think the answer is. And so the single biggest predictor of a person's success, when this is always tricky to do over Zoom, but when I do it in person, it's often things like, you know, social skills or IQ or, you know, various personality traits. And interestingly, what we're finding out more and more is that it's actually life skills. And there's two very long studies that have been going on for over 25 years now. And what they found is that one has found that doing chores by the age of 3 is the best predictor for having a good education, finding a good job that you're happy with, and having healthy relationships with family and friends in adulthood. And then another really long-running study found that those who had a willingness and capacity to work in childhood, which was, you know, done by doing chores, helping around the house, helping the family, was a better predictor of mental health in adulthood. And this was above and beyond things like, you know, socioeconomic status, family problems, and other factors that might be in play. And then I also like to point out that, you know, a recent study found that about 82% of parents who had school age to adolescents said that they did chores growing up, but only 28% of those parents said they make their own kids do chores. And so I point that out just because I think we do live sort of in a world right now where this is maybe not as emphasized or prioritized, working on these life skills, doing chores. You know, home ec isn't offered at most schools anymore. And so it often sort of falls on parents as sort of one more thing to work on, right? That, you know, it used to be you learned cooking and sewing when you were in high school or middle school as part of a class. And now that's something that, you know, needs to be done sort of outside of school and on one's own time. But the reality is chores are really important. And so we're going to talk today about how you can identify, you know, which chores, but also broadly life skills to work on, and how to do it in a way that is hopefully very doable and manageable and can be built up over time. This slide just points out that if you're interested in this topic, it's all over the place. And I think what is emerging when you do sort of a deep dive into different sort of popular press articles in Washington Post or NPR, New York Times, is that, you know, parents are seeking out this information across the board. What do we need to do in terms of life skills? How do we teach these? What do we need to be doing? So there's lots of resources out there. But let's kind of scale back and really talk through what daily living skills are. And, you know, I like the more common definition of these are the things that we just normally do on an everyday basis to take care of ourselves. And whether that's at home, whether that's at school, whether that's in the community. And so when we think about, okay, how do we measure daily living skills? There's a lot of different ways to do that as well. So I'm going to talk through a couple informal measures that are a little maybe more accessible. But then if you would come into like, our assessment clinic at Cincinnati Children's, or you went to see, a therapist in the community, there are other sort of more standardized or formal measures to help you look at sort of what are strengths and challenges in terms of daily living skills and what can you work on. Okay, so there are lots of different sort of checklists out there, and many of them are very good to identify a starting point. This checklist is from the 1950s. That's why if you're looking at it, you may be thinking, well, most 2 and 3-year-olds aren't carrying firewood or, doing some of these other things. But this is sort of a good starting point to say, okay, what's the gauge? What are some things my 2-year-old versus my 10 or 11-year-old versus my teen can be helping with in terms of things around the house? All of these things are life skills. The majority of these are sort of what I would put in more sort of like domestic household life skills, things you need to be doing to take care of the home, but can be sort of a good brainstorming starting point. This is from a parenting magazine, and this is sort of an updated chore list for kids. And so goes toddler all the way through sort of middle school age, with the goal being when you get to middle school that you can do all of these other chores and then add on some more complex ones. And so again, give some nice ideas. I think, depending when I work one-on-one with families on these things, I think some of this is preference-based, right? So there are some families who say, no way do I want my 9-year-old cleaning the toilets. That's something I'm going to wait till he's 16. Totally fine, but just move that down on the checklist, right? But also totally fine to start working on that skill if you feel like that is something that you want your 9-year-old to tackle. I want to share a little bit. This is a book that I think is a fantastic resource. I really like it. I mean, again, I sort of geek out about life skills, but I think when this book is truly a comprehensive life skills checklist. So if you're feeling like, gosh, I don't know what to work on, or, maybe your teen or young adult has an interest in a specific area. If they, like, I have a kid who loves doing yard work. I mean, he just enjoys it, like intrinsically, right? And it's like, well, gosh, how can we kind of like build your skills? And maybe we can go a little above sort of your age. And this book is sort of helpful in thinking through, what those things might be and how I can pull him in to something he enjoys. But this book, it's broken down into age, and this is just a snapshot. It's available in libraries, available on Amazon. And what she does is just in all these different sort of life skill areas, safety, health, home and auto skills, manners and social skills, breaks things down of things that you could work on, with the goal being that, you're not going to do all of this at once. You're going to kind of take a few things and work on them. Or a lot of these things may just come up, as life happens, that, if someone in the family has a fever, you might be making a decision. Okay, are we going to go to the doctor, or is this something that we need to go to urgent care? But it's pulling the teen in and kind of talking through that decision-making process. Like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We can wait till tomorrow morning and go see, Dr. Jones, or actually we need to go to, urgent care at Children's this evening, and kind of understanding what that process is. Another really good tool that I've liked is, as I've started working a lot more with young adults, this is from the College Living Experience. So this is available on their website. And this is a similar, if anyone's familiar with some of the programs around town, like, University of Cincinnati's TAP program, and some of the other things around the area. This is really focused on a college program that's building an independent adult life. So very much life skill employment focused in particular. And they've developed this really wonderful checklist that I use both clinically, but also as a research tool when we're trying to figure out, okay, what are the strengths and challenges of this adolescent or young adult that I'm working with, and what things do we need to target in treatment? And this, so for example, this is their checklist for a morning routine. And I'm going to talk about routines and rhythms in a lot more detail shortly, but you might need to tweak this a little bit for someone, but the majority of these things are the things that need to be done from the time that you wake up until the time you maybe get out the door to either go to class or go to work or whatever it might be. And so, taking this sort of as a guide and saying, okay, what things can they do? What things do they maybe need some prompting or support around versus what is not done at all? And what do we really need to target? And maybe adding a few other things on here that maybe need to be, are specific to that individual. I really like this one for time and organization. Time and organization is definitely, I would argue it's an important life skill. It sort of also falls under some other things like executive functioning as well. But this is absolutely something that if you're going to be successful in today's world, you need to be able to track time. You need to know where your keys and your phone and wallet are. You need to keep them charged. You need to have some sort of planner or organization system that you can kind of keep track of where you need to be, what needs to be done. And so this can be something to kind of, maybe just pick one thing and start with, because these are often a little bit more complex skills that might take some time to really learn. And then here's another nice one for household upkeep, right? I mean, sometimes I think like all of us need these sorts of checklists, right? That these are the things that, you might decide how often you do them. Washing dishes, depending on how big your household is, might be happening more than once a day, every other day, kind of thinking through that versus how often do you vacuum, sweep, or mop, kind of thinking through what guidelines. But these are all things that need to happen if you're living, on your own or with a roommate or with a family member, whatever it might be. Another sort of very informal tool that's available, if you Google it, is this Parents of Teenagers Survival Checklist, which, for its tongue-in-cheek name, it's helpful to, again, sort of get an idea, okay, what are some things that, they may need some help with, or where do I kind of provide them with some instruction on things? Things like measurement. Those are things that if you're working together on a recipe, you might be able to knock all of this out, over a few weeks. If you're baking brownies or baking, cupcakes or cookies for the upcoming holidays, getting them used to understanding what these different measurements are. Versus some of these other things, household repair might happen less frequently, but you can pull them in and talk through those things. Okay, so that's sort of the end of the more informal checklist. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our more formal ones, which if you've been to an assessment, often through school, but also, through, a provider at Cincinnati Children's, the Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scales is one that I often, when I give it to parents, they groan. I mean, it's not a fun one to fill out. It's kind of lengthy. But what this does is it looks at adaptive behavior as a whole. And so when we think about daily living skills, it's one component of adaptive behavior, with the other components being communication, so written, expressive, receptive. The other part of adaptive behavior is socialization. And then motor skills is also in that. And so the Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scales looks at daily living skills in these three main areas, which is personal, so taking care of yourself, hygiene, your body, medical and health, nutrition, exercise. Domestic are all things in the household, keeping it clean, cooking, laundry, etc. And then community is definitely the most broad, but typically involves money management, time management, being able to navigate the community in terms of like actual transportation, but also, knowing where to, if you need to buy soap or shampoo, where do you go for that? How do you navigate the store to find those things? So this is a more formal scale that would give you a score and sort of let you know where you are in comparison to others your same age. And so the other thing that I will say, this kind of goes back to the more informal piece, is that, you know, when we're thinking about life skills, we often sort of map them onto the developmental tasks of adulthood. And this is where, when, you know, for example, I'm working with a family, or we're running a group intervention where we're focused on life skills, we do talk a little bit about sort of long-term goals. And especially with, you know, some of these, I will say some of these tasks of adulthood, you know, are change and are a little bit more fluid than they were, you know, I think how we thought of them 5 or 10 years ago. But when we think about things like college, work, and living independently, it's important to have an understanding of, okay, if an individual has goals in those areas, what life skills are they missing? What things do they need? What do they maybe need a little bit more support on, so that we can help them be successful in these areas? And what I will say is sort of the crux of the work that I do, which is primarily with autistic teens and young adults, is that we know that daily living skills, above and beyond things like language and IQ, is the factor that leads to success in work, in college, in independent living, in socializing with peers, and overall quality of life. It's a really important skill that if we prioritize, we will hopefully see more success and attainment of goals in these developmental tasks of adulthood. Okay, I'll pause for a second. Any questions about assessment before I sort of go on to how do we make a plan to tackle these things? Okay, I don't think, it looks like chat is no. Okay, so I'm going to move on unless someone wants to speak up with a question.
Pardon me, I have one.
Sure.
This is Sandy Black.
Hi, Sandy.
I have 2 questions. One is, on these assessments, is this the same thing that the neuropsychologist would do for, okay, I see you nodding, good.
Well, typically, so there are other adaptive behavior assessments. I would say the Vineland is sort of our gold standard. But I actually have other ones, like if I'm working with an older adolescent or young adult, I use something called the adaptive behavior assessment system. Not as popular in a way, but I would say that it gets it the more sort of adult-based skills in more nuanced detail than the Vineland does. But yes, neuropsychologists should be utilizing something like this in their assessments.
Okay, thanks. Second question is, at what age, or maybe I should say, what would be the youngest age that someone would want to bring a child with developmental and intellectual disabilities to your clinic to help parents start working on these things?
So, I mean, I'll be honest in saying I could probably do another hour talk on that. I think traditionally where, and I will also say I'm a psychologist, I would say the occupational therapists are often the clinicians who are working on these skills as well. Life skills, you know, so I'm more familiar with the autism literature. A 3-year-old with autism is already typically a year behind their peers in these life skills, and the gap just widens. And so ideally, we should be tackling these skills, you know, from the beginning, right? And that way it's not as overwhelming. I think ideally, maybe more, you know, late elementary, middle school is when you're able to tackle some of these other sort of higher level life skills, like cooking, like cleaning the house, and integrate it in. So I think best answer from the beginning, but if you didn't do that, you don't have to stress out. I work with a lot of families that are starting in adolescence or young adulthood, and it's just putting that plan together to tackle it.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, great question. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about sort of putting together a plan. And, you know, again, I think ideally, if you've got a team to help you put this plan together, That's the best case scenario. And maybe that team is, your family, or if you've got, siblings, if you've got neighbors who help out, but also, if you've got a therapist, if you've got an occupational therapist on your care team, a teacher, an aide, kind of keeping everyone in the loop on this, because life skills goes really across home, school, and work. And so building this team, if folks are consistent, makes it a lot easier to tackle these things and to see progress and movement. So the first step, and it's why we talked a lot about assessment, is you want to prioritize which skills you're going to target. As I said, I think if you made a list, you might have 20 to 30 things on that list within 5 or 10 minutes of just thinking through life skills you might want to tackle. That is too many, right? And so you really need to think through, like, what are we going to tackle at home, school, or in the community? And so the questions, as I'm meeting with families, these are usually the things that we go through. And so my first one is always, what skill is going to have the biggest impact? And when I say impact, I really mean, how is it going to make, and I'm going to talk primarily about teens. How will it make the teens' life easier? Will it make the family's life easier? Will it make the caregiver's life easier? Will it help the teen become more independent? Will it decrease stress in the household, like getting out the door in the morning? I think if you've ever had to do this, it's often very stressful. There's a lot of things to do, a lot of things to kind of keep in mind. That is often sort of that morning routine slide that I showed a little bit ago. That's often the biggest bang for the buck sometimes, is like, let's figure out how to make our morning routine feasible and smooth. So kind of thinking through impact for everyone, not just the teen. Are there skills that are going to be easy to target? Are there things that, maybe the teen has a lot of it mastered, so maybe they like cooking and they can almost cook, mac and cheese on the stovetop on their own, but they can't strain it over the sink. So how do we teach them how to do that and get them comfortable? There's a safety component in there, but if we can teach them the safe way, that is something that's pretty easy. Will probably make them feel good, build their independence, make you feel good, and feeling like confident. If they want to make that for lunch, you're fine with that. But then it's going to also lead to targeting other cooking skills on the stovetop potentially. And so when we're thinking about easy to target, we're also thinking about, is there maybe some prompting or reminding that's happening for just a little part of the skill, not the majority of it, right? We also want to think through what skills are the hardest to target. So that's something to be thinking on as you're prioritizing. Are there skills that they are really almost completely dependent on someone else, or a reminder, or many reminders to complete? Are there things that they're resistant to learning? Are they scared of cooking? Is that going to be a battle? Are there sensory issues related to bathing that would need to maybe take more time to get through? What things are going to be most motivating? I think that's a nice place to start. I always say daily living skills are not fun. If all of us could get out of probably doing the laundry and vacuuming, the majority of us would, but they have to get done. And so the motivation piece is often a complex piece that I would say when working with families, this is often where they need help. It's like, how do you keep this, the teen bought in and make it motivating to some degree, but also this stuff just has to get done. And so kind of building that in as a theme, but thinking about how do we motivate them? And then what are potential obstacles, and being realistic about this. So, if you come in and you're working with me and you say, I'm going to work on 10 things, but you've got 2 other kids and you have a full-time job, like, we need to really think, do you have the energy and effort to devote to that? Or should we scale back and really prioritize the thing that's going to be easy and give some big impact? And then once we have that success, we'll add things in. So being realistic about what all the potential obstacles might be.
Amy,
And
there's
then,
a,
oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, there was a question in the chat box. I
Yes.
wanted to catch it before you change slides.
No. Okay, I see it from
Okay.
Carolyn. Okay. If a major obstacle is fine motor skills and executive functioning, is there a best approach? So I think one approach, if there are motor skill issues, whether it's fine motor and gross motor, motor planning, I think it is a nice opportunity to pull in an OT if that's a feasible option to think through, because there's often there's a lot of different things you can pull in to help with fine motor. Like, for example, I worked with a young adult who washing dishes was a struggle because things get caked on and you actually do have to scrub really hard, right? And so there's some really like cool tools out there that you don't have to push as hard on pots and pans and utensils, but it was kind of looping other people in to say, gosh, do you know what works? I don't just necessarily want to go on Amazon and buy what's there. I want to understand, is there something that can help with that? So if it's possible to pull someone in, but I think as you're prioritizing skills, that would be sort of, not an obstacle, sort of something you need to be thinking about when you're thinking about what skills you're going to work on. Are there workarounds? Are there ways to pull things in? Executive functioning. And so executive functioning, just to define it for folks, is sort of this very broad set of skills that involve organization, planning, time management, prioritization, working memory. And so we often think of executive functioning as something that a lot of individuals who have a diagnosis of ADHD struggle with. But the reality is that we know that executive functioning really affects sort of across autism and other intellectual and developmental disabilities. So executive functioning, I would say the approach that I use the most, because this is something we do all the time in our work, is checklists, task analyses, which I'm going to talk about here shortly, but it's really like making it clear that it is okay to use reminders, whether it's electronic, whether it's paper and pencil, to break a complex task down into steps and to continually utilize those checklists and those things to help. That there's, if you always have to look at a checklist to do laundry and then set a timer to remind you to change the load to the dryer, and then set another timer to take it out, that's totally fine. That's a great strategy, but that's going to really help someone with executive functioning challenges, with the working memory piece, with the planning piece as well. So not necessarily a best approach, but I would say the things that I'm going to be talking about are very applicable to that. And I'll try to reference EF and fine motor as I go through it. Okay. Is my mouse stuck? Okay. So I'm going to go through a couple case examples. And so I'm going to go through, this is my 9-year-old, and I have his permission to talk about this. I'm going to go through a teen that I've worked with, and then I'm also going to talk briefly about a young adult that I worked with as well, who was transitioning to living on his own, and how we especially worked on domestic skills. So I'm going to do my best to talk about all of those things in our remaining time. But I want to take you through this because this is a quick example of how you really sort of prioritize these things. And so my 9-year-old struggles with paying attention and focus and staying on task. Executive functioning is a huge challenge for him. And so when I look at the skills that will have the largest impact, it's everything what I call a rhythm. So it's your morning rhythm, waking up and getting out the door to go to school. It's your afternoon rhythm. It's coming home from school and all the things you need to do to get ready for what happens after school. And then it's getting ready for bed. And there's a lot of things to keep in mind. And so I'll tell you a little bit about how we did that. He chose that he would like to clean the bathroom. That's why I always say, like, he's a 9-year-old boy and wanted to clean the bathroom, partly because he's got siblings. And I think he was tired of them making a mess. And this was a way for him to have some control over that. The skills that were easiest for us to target that we could put on his sort of like contract that I'll show you in a second was cleaning the bedroom. We had already made a checklist for that. And so that was an easy one to just kind of refine it. And putting laundry away. We've got a bigger family, and so laundry is constant. And so from the age of 3 or 4, they've been involved in putting their own laundry away, but we needed to refine it a little bit. And as I said, he's my yard work guy. He loves doing yard work. And so when I was thinking about this, you know, motivation, I think everyone goes to sort of allowance and money immediately. Does not have to be that. That's again, sort of a whole nother talk we could do. The way that we've set it up and the way that a lot of families that I work with set it up is either some sort of earning of money or earning of privileges, which might be screen time, which might be things they already get for free, like, you know, a movie night on Friday, or going out to eat once or twice a month and getting to pick that place. When we were making this sort of plan for him, his obstacles were, as I said, he has trouble focusing. He gets distracted in the middle of tasks. So we need a lot of prompts, very focused, slow him down, look him in the eye and give directions. But strengths is he's a pleaser. He loves pleasing. He loves being independent, and he does really well with checklists because we've seen that work really well for him. And so when we put this daily living skills contract together for him, these are the things that we thought about. What skills are going to be targeted? You want to be specific. So, you know, you need to clean your room once a week on Sundays using the checklist. How much prompting is allowed? After you think it's done, I'm going to come in, go through the checklist, and then you have an opportunity to kind of revise everything that was done on the checklist or fix something that maybe you forgot, right? So one prompt. What strategies are we using? We're using a checklist, right? How often is the skill targeted? Once a week, typically on Sunday, but can do it on another day if we have another obligation. What will they earn? You will earn allowance, and that allowance can be used to get things that you like, whether it's buying, you know, a cookie at school, whether it's getting something in the community when we're out and about. And we're going to reevaluate our contract every week. So we always reevaluate a contract on a daily basis. So that's kind of taking you through what our contract looks like, but I do this with teens and we do this with young adults. I will say again, if you can bring in another person to help with mediating conflict or just disputes about whether something was done or whether something was prompted, this can be helpful. But also, you know, I think a lot of the families that I've worked with, they like having another family member or partner or friend to kind of hold them accountable and say, hey, did you do the daily living skills contract again? How's that going? The reality is we all do better when we have an accountability partner. And this can be really helpful for that. And so again, just a quick example, sort of where we landed with him. So on his contract, he's got 6 daily skills. So he does morning rhythm, he empties the dishwasher in the morning, he's got his afternoon rhythm, he puts laundry away, he's got a nighttime rhythm, and then he's got vitamins and medication that he needs to take every day. He's got weekly skills, which are cleaning room, taking the garbage to the curb, he cleans the kids' bathroom, and he helps mop the family room floor. And then he's got extra skills that he can do to earn a little bit of extra money or extra privileges, raking leaves, picking up sticks, watering the garden, helping with things around the home. If we need light bulbs changed, he just likes that stuff. And then our strategies are we use that chore chart / contract. We regularly discuss how things are going. He's a kid who needs a lot of feedback immediately as possible. And he gets a reward. So he's 9. So we give him $9. And what I will say is, I know that may sound steep, but this is also an opportunity for him to learn money management. So that $9, if he has a birthday party, he uses that to buy a gift for a friend. And so this is an opportunity to also build those money management skills early. And here's sort of the contract that we use for each of our kids. It's like on the fridge, all the skills. that need to be done. And then it gets checked off, usually at dinner time, because we're there and it's on the fridge and it makes it easy to do. And then when we erase it, we kind of go through and talk about it every week. So it's a system that, you know, everyone's works a little bit differently. A lot of the families that I work with like this, or like a whiteboard system, something they can hang up that's seen easily, because it's a prompt to the caregiver to say, oh, okay, we got to work on that. We got to talk about that. I want to talk a little bit about rhythm checklists, because the more and more, especially like in the last year, as I'm working with families, this is sort of a hiccup area that is kind of an area that seems to have a big impact if we can figure it out. And so a lot of what I'm doing with families is developing this rhythm, especially morning and nighttime, where we break down what our morning rhythm is. And I like a rhythm rather than a routine, because it just feels, I don't know, less sterile. The teens seem to like rhythm rather than routine. But we break it down. Like, this is part of my son's morning rhythm. And he eventually gets to the point where it's written down on an index card for him. But he's to the point now, you know, we're in late October, it's memorized. He's just got it. It's become internalized. And so if you've got some executive functioning deficits, this can be a helpful thing, with the goal being that it will eventually become a habit, become automatic, in the same way that for a lot of us, getting ready for bed, we don't even think about the steps. We just do them because it's a rhythm. It's a routine that's done every day. If you've got multiple kids, I've seen a lot of families who set up a system like this, that's sort of a whiteboard with Post-it notes or things that they write, or they use a calendar. That can be a helpful tool. I think the piece is you want to do something, otherwise it's just easy to forget, or it's easy to get busy and not prioritize it. So I think thinking through, how do you set up something in the home where that contract and those expectations are there? Okay. So the intervention that I do with our teens with autism and their caregivers is called Surviving and Thriving in the Real World. And this is what our contract looks like. And so it's a 14-week intervention. We meet once a week in a group with all the caregivers, and we talk through how things are going. It's a really nice way to build accountability, because parents are sharing what's working and what's not working, but also hearing from other caregivers. So we do that caregiver session, and then we also do a caregiver teen dyad session one-on-one with a therapist in the home. So it's a silver lining of COVID. We used to bring them into the clinic, and now we're in the home, and it's awesome because we're cooking things the teen wants to cook in the kitchen. And if they, you know, we're putting laundry away in their own space and kind of figuring out how do we problem solve around that. So that's in a nutshell what we do in that intervention. But we use this contract to say, here's the goal, here's the expectations, how often, how independent are you, how many prompts do you get, here's your reward for meeting that goal. We do fade rewards back over time, but in the beginning, especially for teens, this can be helpful for getting that initial acquisition and mastery of skill. I've also worked with families sort of in the clinic who prefer something like this when they're working with their teen, like, these are my daily chores, my weekly chores, and then maybe some things around homework, because that's sort of a sore spot a lot of times, especially in high school. You know, I need to start it at 4:30. I need to write down my assignments in my planner and kind of work on it in that way. I know this is busy and kind of small, but this is an example of a contract from one of our teens at the end of a 14-week intervention. And so what you'll see is this intervention, what we really highlight, we work on rhythm. So we have a morning and a nighttime rhythm that we target. We work on laundry, we work on grocery shopping, we work on cooking, and we work on cleaning. And money management is also sort of typically tied in there in some way. And so, you know, briefly, a little bit about this teen. Very unmotivated to do anything when we started the intervention. I would say that's the majority of teens don't want to come to the daily living skills intervention. You know, he was spending the majority of day at school, or he'd come home and have little demands placed on him. He could kind of do his own thing, watch YouTube, play video games. But His motivation increased when we talked about these skills are important if you want to go on and meet some of your goals that you have as an adult, but also there's some rewards that you can earn as a part of this. I would say the rewards for this teen were the hardest, simply because he got access to a lot of things without necessarily having to earn them. So we had to kind of pull some things back and say, yeah, I know that you usually, get to have extra screen time after homework's done, but now you're going to have to earn it. And so that was something that I think the family found helpful to have, a therapist involved to deal with that. But we saw some nice steady progress. And I would say what became apparent with this teen is that they became more motivated as they saw that this was doable and actually made their life easier. This particular teen may have never admitted that, being able to do his morning rhythm without his mom or dad on him in the morning made his life easier, but it definitely did. And all it ended up being was just having a checklist in his room and downstairs as he was kind of eating breakfast and getting ready to get out the door to help him do that. And he felt good being able to not have his parents nag him. Sometimes that's motivation for the teens. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about evidence-based strategies. I'm going to go through a few of these slides quickly so we have more time to talk about the meat. This, again, I know is autism specific. This is a nice resource if you want to learn about sort of what evidence-based practices work. It's free. It's available through the UNC Child Development Institute. Again, I know this is super busy, but the piece I want to just point out is that we've got all of these skills up here: vocational, social, self-determination, and then a bunch of evidence-based practices. If they've got a colored box, they work for that particular area in that particular age group. So if we zone in on video modeling, for example, which when we look at adaptive and self-help, which is what I'm usually interested, we see that this is effective for middle school through young adults, really preschool through young adults, right? And so that's something that we utilize in our intervention as a result. And we tweak things. Some teens that I work with, they do not like video modeling, and we don't force them to use it. We try to figure out if there's something else that they may gravitate towards. There are a lot of behavioral based strategies. And so I'm going to talk through these. These are often ones that truly have the most success, especially in learning how to just become more independent in doing a task. And so this is a task analysis, which is really just breaking down a task like morning routine into its component steps and listing them out. We take it a step further in the intervention that we do with our teens, and we have them with their caregiver say, okay, here's the step, waking up on my own. Can you do this step independently? Rarely. 2 out of 5 days, parent usually needs to prompt them by shaking them awake after having turned the lights on and done multiple other things. What could you do to become more independent? Set an alarm clock, place it on my desk, working through this. So this is not only a task analysis, but it's really a problem solving exercise as well, as we're kind of figuring out, okay, what are the barriers? What strategies do we need to put into place? But a task analysis is a behavioral technique that's really effective, especially if there's some executive functioning challenges. If a teen is particularly motivated by electronics, for example, there's apps for this. There's to-do list apps. There's checklist apps. I'm an Android Google user, so I tend to stick to that sort of suite of things. But you can put, this into your calendar. It pops up and goes through your list. You can also have it be sort of a checklist that you would literally have to check off. And so there's a lot of functionality out there with different apps that you can utilize to work on these things. There's still a task analysis, but it's just an electronic version. Chaining is another behavioral strategy where, in essence, what you do is after you've broken down a complex task like hand washing into steps, you teach one step at a time. So forward chaining, you might teach rinsing your hands under the water first, and then a caregiver may be coaching through each of the other steps and providing prompts. As this first step is mastered, then you teach the second step. and so on and so forth until every step is mastered without a prompt. So that would be forward chaining. And then, to make this more sophisticated, something like a bathroom cleaning checklist, you could do chaining for this, where you say, okay, we're going to do this together. We're going to, I'm going to do this first for you. Watch me as I do it. I'm going to talk you through it. And then next time you're going to do this first step on your own, and I'm going to try to not do any prompting, right? And so you're going to first master cleaning the sink, wiping down the sink, counter, and faucet before you move on to cleaning mirror and these other tasks. And so then you would still be there kind of teaching them that. Backward chaining is the opposite. You would start with the last step and teach backwards. It's just, how you want to approach it. And there's some rationale behind it if folks have questions about that specifically. Recipes are also a task analysis, right? It tells us that if you want to make scrambled eggs, here's what you need, but here's how to do it in detail. And, something like allrecipes.com, which we use a lot, but a lot of food blogger websites have an accompanying video with this task analysis. So it's a beautiful way to teach cooking and for the teen to get more confident in being able to do that. Another behavioral technique that's beneficial is sort of a motivation assessment, if you will. So this is one we do with our teens. But we typically pull this out if when we ask the teen, like, what do you like? What motivates you? They can't come up with anything. And then we use this to kind of generate some ideas, with the goal being that you really want low tier rewards. Maybe it's a piece of candy. Maybe it's, something small, staying up later 10 minutes on a weeknight, versus a middle tier item that might be a little bit more higher, a movie rental, versus a higher ticket item. Like I've had some teens who have, and these are more sort of those who are able to wait and delay gratification, who were saving up to get like the gaming computer that they want. And it took them months. And sometimes they would just go, and if they had earned like $5, they would pick out one part for the gaming computer that they wanted to build. But it is important to have an understanding of what's motivating, so that can be harnessed to teach some new skills. Some other evidence-based strategies, we're going to talk a little bit about modeling, but technology, and also the hidden curriculum. Adult or peer modeling is huge. And this is probably an area, if you want to start teaching early on, this is the place to do it. I think the grocery store or any store where you're buying things or picking things out is a beautiful place to do this, because if you're going to Kroger and you have the time and you're not rushing out, you can do things like, okay, we need tortilla chips. Where do we find the tortilla chips? When we get there, what brand? What's the price? Why are Tostitos more expensive than Kroger brand? And talking through that and having the parent model some of that, but also doing things like modeling, checking out and paying, picking out produce. So this is a really nice opportunity to kind of be out and about and not only do sort of, purchasing things, but a lot of money management. How do you pay with the debit card versus paying with cash, and, waiting for change and checking your receipt, all of these things. So this can be sort of more naturalistic opportunities or purposeful modeling opportunities that you want them to go in, buy things with a list, check out, and then come out to the car. A lot of our teens, that is like an end goal. The mom wants to wait in the parking lot while they run in with the list and come out, but that takes some time to get there. Video modeling. There is a video on YouTube for just about everything. You just have to watch it and make sure that the content is appropriate. You'd be surprised. But there's some great ones for grocery shopping, excellent ones for cooking, and some excellent ones for laundry, and also with like some home maintenance stuff. So a lot of the things for around the home, there are some fantastic videos out there, and it's just kind of making sure that it goes into enough detail. But a lot of teens like to create their own video, and that's a great way to do it because they're learning the skill as they're doing it, or they want to record their sibling or caregiver do the skill so they can watch it. all really good options, especially if it's like a very specific skill that you're working on. And, you know, I did have a teen who loved making PowerPoints. And so this was a way that he learned about things like doing laundry. He also did a PowerPoint on matching his clothes. He just like struggled to know what colors went together, and this was important for him. So he made a PowerPoint on it. And that helped him learn, but then it was also a reference. So, you know, it's kind of figuring out, are there things that your teen or young adult likes to do, and using that as a teaching strategy. WikiHow is a website that is basically like Wikipedia, but for how to do anything. And what's nice about this, we will sometimes pull these up in session, is they've got sort of a picture explanation typically. Sometimes they're actual pictures, sometimes they're more cartoonish, and then they explain it verbally. And so it's just a nice tool to have if there's some, you know, specific skills that you want to work on that are maybe, you know, like how to fix a toilet. There's a really good WikiHow for that we used with one of our young adults who wanted to do that on his own, but, you know, needed some help about how to do it and what that would look like. There are a lot of apps out there. I would say, the thing that I've learned probably the most since COVID, because I think we've all gotten, maybe not all of us, a lot of us have gotten more dependent on technology and our apps and everything, is that apps are good only if there are not a lot of other apps that are coming up in terms of notifications. And so a lot of the teens and young adults I work with, we may set up a beautiful calendar with a to-do list or that pops up and reminds them. But if they get 95 notifications during the day, that calendar pop-up means less to them. And so it's really kind of figuring out, is that a good strategy, or would sort of the simple paper and pencil or whiteboard method be good? Or do we need to remove some of those other apps and fix notifications on your phone so that when something pops up, you orient and pay attention to it? But there's some really good apps out there. Again, as I mentioned, I'm a big fan of starting with Google Calendar, especially with teens, because you can color code it. So you can have blue be school stuff, you can have green be, you know, chores and things you need to do around the home. Orange is maybe band or music, whatever it might be. And then you can also, the caregiver can have access to the calendar and be able to kind of check it and see that everything's on there. Dentist appointments on there. Do we need to talk through the logistics of that? This is a great tool because I think the majority of us use this day in and day out. So it's not something that they're going to have to adapt to a new system if they get good at using a Google Calendar or, you know, on the Apple as well. The other technology that is fantastic that, again, in the last year, we are just using a lot of with our teens and young adults are the smart speakers. So the Amazon Alexa, the Echo Dots, because you can not only, you can do it verbally, set up alarms, reminders, you can set up routines, but there's also a great app that you can do the same thing and set up things so that on, you know, Tuesday and Wednesday, you have 3 alarms that go off to make sure you are out of bed to go to class at this specific time. And on this day and time, you get reminded to, you know, rinse your dishes and run the dishwasher, whatever it might be, or wipe the microwave down. It's a great tool. Again, if it's the main one being used. And I think that's sort of the thing I'm troubleshooting the most with folks in that area. I know we're almost out of time. I'm going to go through a few more things. Hidden curriculum. This is something that is available. Brenda Smith-Miles is the author of this. The idea behind the hidden curriculum is that it takes things that are sort of gray, like things around hygiene or grocery shopping, and makes them black and white. And sometimes in working with my teens in particular, they are often, no one's ever told them that they need to put on deodorant every day. So maybe they only put deodorant every time they shower. Maybe they only shower 2 or 3 times a week, and that's when they're putting deodorant on, right? And so this is just an opportunity to say, these are sort of the rules, right? These are the expectations. Let's talk about these. What questions do you have? How do we integrate this into your morning rhythm, for example? You need to wear deodorant every day before you go to school. Where should we do that, right? And have that conversation. So we often pull this in as sort of evidence. If a teen's like, no one else in the world wears deodorant more than once or twice a week. And it's like, well, it's maybe not everyone, but there is sort of a hard and fast rule for that. And then, a little bit, as I mentioned, I know we didn't talk a lot about money management in this. It's a complex skill. Again, I think a big learning that I'm taking is, there are money curriculums out there. There's some good websites. We use the Mint, which is Northwestern Mutual's sort of curriculum. So if you Google it, that will pop up. And we like that one because it just really kind of goes through different aspects of spending, saving, and budgeting sort of across from childhood through young adulthood. But naturalistic opportunities are often the best times to work on money. Doing price comparisons, going to the grocery store, how much do things cost? Building financial literacy around that. Why would you buy the Kroger generic macaroni versus Kraft mac and cheese? There's a price difference, but maybe a taste difference, talking through those things. But things like saving and budgeting for a big purchase, if you're going on a trip or, you're planning a get together over the holidays for families, that can be an opportunity to kind of talk through, how are you budgeting for that? How much money does that cost? Showing teens and young adults how much bills cost. How much is a cell phone bill? How much does something like Netflix cost? What is the water bill every month? But then other things, like they may be more motivated to clean the house if there's a party or a get together happening, and pulling them in to maybe learn some things that they're not doing on a regular basis. But things like medical appointments, those are typically have to happen natural, but when it's going to one, it's having them check in. It's having them help fill out forms or fill them out. Or when you're picking up a prescription, having them be the one that gives the information to the pharmacist. And you're there, but answering questions, having them pay for that, walking through what things cost, that kind of thing. So naturalistic opportunities, you don't want to overwhelm yourself and do them all the time, but thinking, is there something coming up that provides me an opportunity to work on this, even if it's one thing. I know I'm just about out of time. I was going to talk through that teen I mentioned earlier. The things that were most successful for him were task analysis. I would say that's probably the thing that I use the most in treatment with teens and young adults is that. But then also turning that into a checklist, especially for the rhythms. We also typically organize personal hygiene items in some sort of basket, and almost like was going away to college basket, so that everything's in one place and it gets put back there after each rhythm. And kind of similarly with items in the showers, they're a place, especially if there's multiple family members, that we can kind of designate their space. And then this teen, also the family put the entire contract on a whiteboard and they hung it in their kitchen, and they talked about it. They talked about it at breakfast. They talked about it at dinner, not all the time, but just kind of checking in. What, this morning we had a hard time getting out on time. Like, what happened there? Like, what could we do better tomorrow? How can you earn that reward? We set a lot of alarms using an Alexa smart speaker. So when to start laundry, when to get it out of the dryer, because even though it had a timer, the teen wasn't tuning into it. A lot of modeling related to grocery shopping and cooking. Teen had some sensory aversions to smells in the kitchen when cooking, and a lot of fear about burning themselves. And so it was getting them used to being safe, but also cooking things that maybe were not brought on a lot of fear for them, that didn't necessarily make them have to, drain noodles in a strainer, things that were a little easier to do. And then it took us a long time to identify rewards, like I mentioned. And then I would say the last piece, this often really builds some nice additional relationship building between parent and teen. You don't want to make this sort of an argument, but talking about, I'm really your coach in this scenario. Like, I want you to get better at this. I want you to get these things done, of course, but the goal is that this is going to help you later in life, right? I know that can be hard to see, but that's the reason we're doing this. Last thing, like I've mentioned, you want to reevaluate this pretty regularly. So weekly to start, and then maybe every other week, and maybe eventually every month as they get, older, but you're going to have to change rewards up. You're going to want to add new skills, and you're going to want to modify expectations. So have them become more independent, in particular. Here's just some obstacles and barriers. I think I've talked about a lot of these things as we've kind of gone along, but happy to chat about that through any questions. And here's just some take-home messages. So I know I'm a few minutes over, so I thought happy to jump to take questions or comments if anybody has any.
You're fine, because we go to 7:30, but we have time.
Oh, good. Well, that
yeah.
way we have lots of time. Okay.
Yeah.
So anyone have questions on anything, or anyone want me? I'm also, the thing I did not go over that I could talk about if folks would find that helpful is a little bit of work that I've done with this with more young adults who are with the goal of them either living completely independently or independently with some support, whether that's a roommate, whether that's like a support staff person as well, that's maybe with them or in the same kind of apartment building as well. Would that be helpful? Okay, so I have a yes. I'll go ahead and do that. So I'll go back to sort of assessment with this young adult in particular, and I can talk about bathing as well. So I'll get to that in a moment, but what we ended up working so they were getting ready. We had about 6 months where they were still living with their caregivers, and we said, okay, we're going to work towards having them transition to an apartment that they will be living on their own. But there is someone that will be available to check in on them and will check in with them on a weekly basis. And so we did an assessment, and we did really kind of a hybrid where I did just kind of an interview with the mom and the dad, and then also the young adult, and said, okay, like, what is he good at? What are things that are emerging and what's hard? Okay, with a really particular focus on things that you need to do in maintaining a home, right? Not only your own hygiene, but also the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, the grocery shopping, those sorts of things. And then also chatted with the young adult separately, because I think that his voice, I think, wouldn't have been heard as clearly if we had done the interview all together. And then I had both the parents and the young adult fill out one of those more formal assessments so we could kind of see where things matched up. And after that, we really kind of developed a game plan, if you will, that said, okay, the big areas that are hard. I mean, the area that was honestly probably the hardest, that is still really hard, and I think this is just a hard skill to work on, is waking up independently, not hitting that snooze button, not rolling over and going back to bed. So even if you've got the alarm and you've got 6 alarms, getting up. So getting out of bed was one. The other was really just kind of keeping space clean, with a specific emphasis on laundry. So not wearing clothes that had already been worn, making sure that things were clean. And then also cooking. What were going to be things that he would be able to cook on his own independently for breakfast, lunch, and dinner that were somewhat nutritious, right? We can't it's okay to heat up a mac and cheese in the microwave or oven every now and again, but that can't be our sole dinner that we have every day. And so what we landed on really focusing on was our morning rhythm, because he was taking some college classes. And then we ended up focusing on laundry and cleaning the kitchen, cleaning the bathroom, and cooking. So I know that sounds like a lot, but he had a lot of dedicated time to do that. And so we ended up doing a lot of checklists where we went through and said, here's your morning rhythm. what do you need to do? We use the Alexa smart speaker a lot. And that is the primary sort of technology component that we use. But we also use a to-do list, just an old-fashioned paper planner, where we write down what needs to be done on a daily basis. And we helped him understand that there's really a flow to things. We developed a daily responsibilities list for the home and a weekly responsibilities checklist for the home, and then would have him transfer that each week to his planner, along with any other things related to class, doctor appointments. He would get together with friends typically once a week, putting that on there, and making sure that if you didn't do something on Monday that was on your to-do list, it gets transferred to Tuesday. Like, it needs to eventually get done. This is a critical piece. And if things don't get done, by the weekend, then you're going to have to spend some time doing that, like a part of living on your own. And he was intrinsically motivated because he wanted to get out of his parents' home. He did not want to live with them. He wanted this opportunity to live on his own, to be a success. And so, those daily and weekly responsibility checklists are something that his family and they revisited every day and every Sunday to kind of talk through what went well and what didn't go well, and how do we kind of get better at that next week? Like, what are our goals? So that, again, after that 6 months, when he was ready to transition to the apartment, he had the core set of skills. It was not perfect. There were still things that need to be worked on, but he knew the basics enough, with still some support from some support staff, as well as his parents, that he really has kind of this core set of skills needed. And now they're in the process of just kind of refining things. And a lot of it, to the earlier point, is some executive functioning stuff, right? That you've got to sort of know that if, you decided to not do laundry in favor of, watching Netflix that evening, then you may run out of clothes that are needed to, go out with your friends, right? And then you have to wear dirty clothes. Like, there's got to be some planning, and you've got to have some stick-to-itiveness with getting these things done. So it honestly looks very similar, but it's making it doable. And I think this was probably our most challenging thing for this young adult. It's like, it was a lot to say you're going from living at home to living on your own, but we had to really pick what are the critical things versus what can sort of still be worked on over the next year to 2 to 3 years, right? And sort of fill those in slowly. I mean, it's not ideal that his floor, his carpet maybe is not vacuumed as often, but that is probably better than him not, learning to cook for himself, or not having clean clothes, or not taking a shower, those sorts of things. So a lot of prioritizing in that regard. And pulling in other team members. So I know that was brief, but just kind of a quick snapshot of how we tackled that. Okay. So I can go back. So Terry, you had the question about bathing. So we have a young adult now who is entrenched about not bathing. So I think the first piece is to do kind of a deep dive into what is going on with not bathing. So I think a lot of times it is a sensory piece. And so considering that, like a lot of, not liking the feel of water. If it's a shower, not liking the feel of the water in your face, or not having kind of control over that, can lead to that. Some of the smells and things with shampoo and body wash, that can be a sensory overload. So I think it's kind of eliminating some of those things. And if sensory is an issue, there are some workarounds. We've had a lot of success with just like a handheld shower. So there's some control over being able to kind of control how the water feels on your body, but also where it's going, and, being able to kind of pull it farther and closer into your body. So that's one thing. Baths can be less, for some folks, easier in that regard, but you still have to kind of figure out the workaround of washing your body in the bathtub, which can be a little tricky. So it's not typically my go-to, but it's better than nothing at all. I think if there's other things around bathing, if there's any sort of the sensory piece with kind of smells, it's giving them an opportunity to go to Walmart or Target and Kroger and picking out products that are okay with them, that maybe are unscented or are the scent that they prefer. That can also lead into some buy-in if you're involved in doing something like that. Like, you know, it's fun to like try out a new shampoo or a new body wash maybe, and that can lead to some success in that way. But a lot of times I will say what we end up having to do is it's tied to a reward. This is the expectation around bathing. Bathing has to happen, you know, every other day. And maybe we don't start there. I mean, I worked with a teen who showered every 3 weeks. And by the end, we were getting him to shower about 1.5 times a week, which we took as like a win, because he was just, the experience of going through it, it was becoming less aversive to him, where just the avoidance of it was also almost bringing some anxiety into it. So anxiety often plays into the bathing piece as well, and understanding what that is and if there's a way to decrease anxiety. So whether that's, you know, setting clear expectations about what needs to happen, how long, playing music, you know, I think that can also be helpful to do sort of a task analysis of what we mean by taking a shower, what that entails, and for how long, so that those expectations are clear and on the table. But that reward piece can often also be really valuable to say, if you're going to bathe every other day, you get access to this motivating component, whatever that might be for that teen or young adult. It's a very, I would say, case by case basis. So I know those are broad tips, but hopefully that helps a little bit. Okay, I think I hit all the questions. Anything else, or any in-person questions, or is there anything I can give more detail on? I know I went through some of the strategies somewhat quickly.
I know, just for those who are interested, like a cooking. So
Yeah.
So there, yeah, like you mentioned, there's a lot of, I looked up that allrecipes.com when you mentioned it, and it's nice. They have the recipe and they have the video. There's also, if you feel like your child or your young adult would get something out of a group, there in Dayton, there's a Healthy Habits Cook Club. Now they fill up quite quickly, but they have cooking classes where a group of them meet. It's usually like an adult or a caregiver or somebody's with an individual, and they have like stations and stuff, and they cook as a group and they cook a specific recipe. If you like something like that. I don't know if you know of any other ones, but I know there's one there in Dayton that does that. Plus there's online ones that do that.
Yeah. And I know, I can look, Patty, and get back to you. I know our OT department used to run them as well at main campus, because we've got a really nice kitchen. The thing I will say too with cooking that I think we found really successful in terms of kind of building a lot of skills, and we do this in our group intervention, is that is, you know, I think a lot of us really like food, right? Like that is a natural motivator for a lot of us. And so if there's a recipe that they like, it's pulling them in from the beginning to the end. Okay, well, let's look it up. Okay, let's find it on the internet. Let's find it in a cookbook. There's some really nice visual cookbooks too, like the Look and Cook is a nice series that's more picture-based, but also has words. So looking up the recipe, okay, let's make a list of the ingredients that we need. Let's set a budget. Let's go to the store and buy those things, like just navigating the grocery store for those items. paying for them. Like, were we on budget? Why, why, oh, we had to buy the, the expensive olive oil because they were out of the other one. So that we didn't factor that in, right? Having those sorts of conversations. And then at home, watching the video if it's available, but then cooking it, right? And so sometimes with something like that, it can be helpful depending on how willing your teen is to jump in. It's sort of that, have them watch you first, and then you do it together, and then you step back, sort of that 3-step process, so that they feel more comfortable. But also with cooking, I've worked with a lot of caregivers who feel very nervous about letting cooking happen, just because knives are involved and heat's involved and a lot of things could happen, right? And it's true, but if you really kind of set them up with some of those skills and they're watching you and you're giving them feedback in as neutral of a way as possible, then they'll be okay and they're going to feel good about that. And the reality is, all of us sometimes cut our finger if you're chopping something. How do you take care of it, right? And it shouldn't happen every time. So normalizing some of those things. So cooking is a nice way to bring in a lot of other components, as well as cleaning, because you always have to clean up after you cook, right? And that's kind of a part of it, is you've got to clean up your workspace and clean up the dishes. So that can be a nice way to do that, especially if you've got wait time while brownies are cooking or something's in the oven as well. So that is kind of a fun one, that a group one would be good. But a lot of our teens say they don't like the recipe when they go to those. So I think, a lot of picky eaters, right? So being mindful that they might want to make skyline chili at home as opposed to, scrambled eggs in a group class as well.
And I think it's helpful as a progressive. What we did was, like, you can choose recipes by, you want like a 3-ingredient recipe and then a 5-ingredient recipe, and then eliminate some of the steps. So it's not quite so overwhelming when they first start. It's the progression. And so you do have another question out there.
Oh.
From Carolyn at the bottom there.
Yes. So I would ask like your PCP for a referral to OT, and just for daily living skills. And they will, be able to help with that. So I don't know. I mean, if school has an OT, like I know some of the high schools that do kind of more cooking stuff will have an OT who helps with that. But I would get an outside referral, especially if, that's an area that you have a few things that, especially like things like fine motor and those pieces, and OT will be really valuable for. So yeah, good question.
Does anybody else have any other questions? I know, just one of the things to think about is, like you said about the cooking, just do it in little steps. Same with, like, you had one of the slides talked about medical, setting the appointments and things like that. We're still working on these lists. Like, we can get, he hasn't made appointments yet, phone calling, and that has been difficult, but he'll go to the appointment, that kind of thing. So it's like there's several steps. It doesn't happen overnight. It's just like driving. It took us 2 years to get his driver's license, and then he took another 2 years we rode with him everywhere after he got his driver's license. Now he's starting to go in a small radius. He started out with a 10-mile radius, and now he's up to, maybe a 12-mile radius, but it's a long process.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's a good point, Pat. Like, it really is. And I think it's not being okay with going slow, right? But I think it's pulling in those natural opportunities as they arise. I mean, we're all in this weird world where if you get, coughing or anything, right? Like, we're like, oh, is it COVID? Is it something else? There's so many bugs going around. That's an opportunity to do some teaching. Like, okay, so you're coughing, are you warm? This would be an opportunity to take your temperature. Okay, I think you're probably gonna have trouble sleeping tonight. Like, what should we do about that? Like, do we want to take some over-the-counter cough medicine? Do we want to take some ibuprofen if you have a fever? It's a lot of those sort of teaching moments that happen that you can really use that go a long way. But to your point, I think it's taking everything slowly. Like even the morning rhythm that I mentioned, I would say the majority of the teens that I work with, we start with that, and probably half of our teens are still needing some pretty significant prompts in that area after really 14 weeks of working on it, right? So it does take time to really develop these things, but it's like keeping at it. You're seeing progress, but it does take some time to get there in that way.
And
So
even
yes,
like when you go into the doctor's office, you have these forms to fill out, like especially if it's a new doctor. So we started, okay, well, you know your name, and then they fill out certain parts, and then mom fills in some of the other stuff. But we work through that form so that as time goes on, he fills out a little more and a little more and a little more. The goal is that he can do everything from start to finish, but we're not there yet.
Yeah. Well, and I think going to that point, I would say that the other lesson that I learned and we talk a lot about is, I don't like to ever say that like parents or caregivers are like obstacles, but I think like with everything, you have to sort of be aware of your own stuff, right? Like if you're busy and you're in a rush, you may like, a lot of, like my youngest just learned how to tie his shoes, right? And it's painful. Like it takes 5 minutes. Like we're waiting to go out the door. Right. But like, that's a huge thing for him to give him that independence. And so it's being aware of sort of like giving that time and space. But the other piece I would say I work a lot with our caregivers on is some of like the over involvement and letting go. Like if putting laundry away, I know that if you did it as his parent, it would be nice and folded and lovely and the drawer would close, but he's doing it and he's never done it before. And we're going to take that as a win. And then as he does it more and more, we're going to work on that other piece, but you just need to like shut his bedroom door and walk by. If that's like setting you off, pushing your buttons, and to let go because he's doing the skill independently. So I think that's a piece of it too, is knowing when to let go and to kind of not be over involved in that way too, which can be hard. If you can do it faster and more efficient sometimes than they can, but then they don't learn that skill. So
is there any other questions? I'm going to close the recording. So if anybody doesn't want to be typing or wants to talk without being recorded, I'm going to shut the recording down so we can have an open discussion before we close for the night. But I want to thank you, Amie, again, for all the information was wonderful and very clearly presented. So thank you for all the information you shared.
Yeah. And if anyone wants to talk offline, I mean, there's my email. Feel free to reach out, or if you've got a question about one of the things I talked about, I'd be happy to chat about that. So,
okay, one second.